Welcome back to Vetted VA Live, where we get together here every week to answer questions of importance to the Vetted VA community. You guys who are showing up asking questions every day about home ownership, about refinancing, about anything housing and finance related. So we bring a couple of our expert moderators in and go through a topic. So we're going to do something a little bit different tonight. The market's been changing. We went from an incredibly hot market to something that's a little bit more balanced. So we're going to go through that with both of our experts who are in different parts of the country and talk a little bit about that. And then we're going to get into a couple of things that hit the press in the last couple of weeks. Some very wealthy multi-millionaire social media experts have piped up saying some things about the housing market that would lead you to believe, if you didn't know any better, that there's strong reasons to not own a home. So we're going to go point and counterpoint on that, go through some of the things that they said, what's valid about it, what's not, and what you need to be thinking of as a potential buyer in the current market. So with that, let me introduce you to our experts tonight. On the top row here I think it's my left here, depending on how you're looking at it, is Jason Sharon. Jason is out of South Carolina. Jason, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your business?
Sure, absolutely. So, stated Jason Sharon, I own Home Loans Inc., which is a small boutique mom and pop brokerage in Charleston, South Carolina. We're licensed in 7 states, all the Southeast. Retired Navy veteran, spent 20 years in the Navy.
Perfect. And then we've got Randy. Randy, I always forget, what part of Texas are you out of? Tell us where you're at and a little bit of your background.
Absolutely. I'm just a little bit north of Dallas. It's a small town called Salina, but it's Dallas, Fort Worth, DFW area. And I've been living since 1989. I been in Texas for most of that time. Started way back before they were even able to do Texas home equity loans here in Texas, and I've just stayed in it. Hadn't been smart enough to get out for 30 years. So
perfect. And do you have a military background, or just enjoy serving military veterans?
No, perfect. Military family. I have actually 8 veterans in active duty currently right now serving in my immediate family. So pretty busy.
Perfect. So let's, before we jump into it, let's talk. We talked a little bit about the market moderating, which obviously it has from this time last year. Let's talk about each of our markets. I'll end with the California discussion. But Randy, why don't you tell us a little bit about the Texas market and buyers that you're seeing and what they're experiencing and how that's different from 6 months to 12 months ago?
Certainly. So the big thing here in Texas is obviously there's different micro markets, but all the markets as a whole were crazy the last couple of calendar years, where that there was tons of offers on any home listing that came out, and people were accepting homes that they might not have in normal markets or bidding way over. Austin was probably the craziest market in that there was one instance where I had one of my buyers was buying a $700,000 listing. They bid $900,000 and didn't get the deal. So there's crazy stuff like that was going on. But what I'm really seeing probably since March or so, feeling here is a more balanced market. It's not so supply side oriented. Before there might get 60 listings or 60 offers on a listing, whereas now there's 4 or 5. There's actually some competitive and some discussion, and starting to see things like seller concessions again. Also seeing some things where the prices are being dropped here and there. So I'm having quite a few of my people that were frustrated and got out of the market before come back to me and say, hey, we want to take another run at this. So that's really the bulk of my pipeline right this minute, is folks that were pre-approved last fall, got frustrated, and are coming back.
Well, hey, a couple things, guys. We actually had a really good question pop up just off of something that you said, Randy. So I'm going to throw that up here and we can answer it. But for those of you watching at home, this is live. We have clearly an outline of some things we're going to talk about tonight. But if you have a question about anything that we're talking about or anything else, housing, finance, VA, finance related, shoot it in the comments and we will definitely answer it. So Randy, you're talking about now something that was totally foreign to all of us, the seller's concession over the last few years. And the question we had here is, what's a seller concession? So what does that mean if you have a buyer who is able to negotiate a seller concession, and how does that benefit them?
Yep. So particularly in the VA loan, say you've got a listing at 100,000, it's going to cost you about $6,000 in closing costs and escrows. You have a good aggressive realtor. They go in, they think that the home's been on the market for a few days now. They think there's some negotiation room. they can go in and say, hey, I'll give you that $100,000 that you wanted for your listing, but we want $6,000 in seller concessions. So if they agree to that, what they've basically done is ended up with a $94,000 net sales price to the seller, but that $6,000 is able to cover some of your costs for normal costs and escrows. And that's a big thing that we didn't see a lot the last couple of calendar years just because of the craziness. But it's a great benefit to the VA home loan applicant in order to keep more cash in their pocket. Bottom line.
Absolutely. And it's unique to the VA home loan in that everyone knows VA doesn't require you to put a down payment, but you combine that with the seller concession, you can get into a home with no money out of pocket. And the only way really for us to accomplish that the last few years was to do it with a lender credit, which was to give you a higher interest rate. So both of those, in essence, what you're doing is you're trading the, a lower payment. So say if in your example, Randy, if we cut it $6,000 from $100,000 to $94,000, depending on your interest rate, it's about $5 to $6 per thousand. So if you save $6,000, maybe it's $30, $35 that you're saving in the monthly payment. So when we ask a lot of people, even if you have the $6,000, would you rather have $6,000 in the bank post closing, or would you rather have a $35 lower monthly payment? So there's not a right or a wrong answer, but usually when we ask a client, they're going to have a feeling one way or the other of which is best to them. So great. It's a great option in the current market. How about for you, Jason, in the South Carolina and the other states that you're serving? What are you seeing in terms of strength of the market, and how are your buyers faring in writing offers with sellers?
So I think it's still strong in areas where the job market is strong. So if you look at Charleston has an amazing jobs market. Columbia, the capital, isn't as strong of a job market, so you don't see as much pressure for multiple offers there. We still do, but not as much in the places that don't have strong job markets. A rural town is definitely not going to be anywhere near as strong as a town that's got a military presence and has some industry. And that's, like I said, I'm licensed in 7 states, and I would say that's pretty much anywhere. Like I do lives in Alabama, and I still see Huntsville, Birmingham, very, very strong. But if you get down into like Troy, Alabama, the only thing there for commerce is the university. You're not seeing anywhere near as much competition there as you do in some place that's got some industry.
Well, a question I kind of have for both of you guys, so feel free to react to this. What I hear a lot in the media is we're talking about housing starts, housing completion. So new homes, new supply coming into the market. For us in California, we don't have a lot of land left. So Orange County, LA County, even Riverside, San Bernardino, there's new construction, but there's not a lot of it. So we don't look at that as being this big influx of demand. Texas has a lot more land. A lot of the states that you're in, Jason, have land and have seen a large amount of new construction. Is that impacting anything in terms of the supply-demand balance for you guys? And does that mean anything for buyers who might be watching the show?
Well, new construction is vital. We have to build more houses, right? If you look at the supply and demand, what's put us in this position is how many people want houses, how many houses are there to have. If you look at new household formations, which the median new household formation is a 33-year-old wanting to get married, move out from his parents' house, get married, have kids. So if you look at the birth rate 33 years ago compared to the number of houses that are being built now, we're still very much upset in the demand area than the supply area. So yes, we have new construction. It's helping, alleviate some of the burden or the stress on the existing market, but we still need to build a whole lot more. So we probably need to build, if you look at the PhD guys that write that kind of stuff, we should be building almost twice as many houses as we're building right now, just to keep up with population growth.
And how about in your market, Randy? Is new construction a big element of your market throughout Texas?
Absolutely. One of the big things, like the little community that I'm in, is north of Dallas, and we have 18 subdivisions right now moving dirt. So it's a big thing, big growth. We're supposed to ended up being the largest town in the county. So we're seeing a ton here, but just Dallas-Fort Worth in general, again, related to what Jason had to say, there's a lot of businesses that are moving their headquarters to this part of the world, et cetera, and all the implications that go with that. But I'll tell you that the builders aren't as much in the driver's seat as they were the last couple of calendar years because of the demand's not quite there. I've seen some really crazy things that builders have done over this last couple of years to borrowers, and we're back where that realtors are welcome again, and for a while there they weren't welcome at builders. Just some crazy stuff, but I feel like a lot of that has settled down. So
Perfect. So the view out from out here on the West Coast, California, we do loans throughout California, especially Southern California, but the Sacramento area, the Bay Area, and those areas have all reacted a little bit differently. For us here in Southern California, where say 60-70% of my business comes from, it's very similar to what you guys said. The trophy properties, the homes that are really nice, really upgraded, that look like they can be on HGTV, those are still getting multiple offers, not the crazy multiple offers like we got a few years ago. Best example I can give, in my neighborhood, home came on the market. It had been completely redone when those people bought it 3 or 4 years ago. They did a beautiful job. They sold for $1,000 over list. Same model, a couple blocks over, was redone in the 90s. Nice house, clean house, and they sold for $300,000 less. Same model, just there's a big difference there. And then you get to the stuff, the distressed things, properties that are just bad and need a bunch of work, or they're in a difficult location. Those are the things that we're seeing sitting longer. So a lot of it comes down to what your market looks like. For us here in Southern California, the Inland Empire, there's more first-time buyers, FHA buyers, VA buyers. Those folks have been impacted a little bit more, the entry-level buyer versus the move-up buyers, by this. So we're seeing those areas maybe with a little bit more difficult time than the coastal stuff. But anyway you cut it, it's a very different market than it was a year ago. But still, we're looking at it's the sellers, I would say, still have a slight upper hand in where we're at, but it's much better for all of our buyers out there. So with that, why don't we jump into these couple of articles? And the first one, where
we got a question. Do we want to answer that question?
We can absolutely go through it. So the question here is, how long does a lender or a broker honor pre-approvals with the lending culture? So just how long, when you guys pre-approve someone, how long is that good for? And what does it mean if it's expired? Does that mean the person is no longer qualified, or what does that mean to you guys?
Sure. So I answered this question earlier today with a client. So for VA, a credit report is good for 120 days. So technically, after 120 days, I don't have, if I pre-approved you today and 120 days from now you had not closed on the house, I would need to pull another credit report in order to close that loan. Now, am I going to do it on day 121? No, of course not. If you haven't found a house, I'm not going to go just pull your credit willy-nilly. But as long as you haven't done anything silly, then your pre-qual should not really change, as long as you haven't gone, missed a payment, bought new debt, got fired, took a pay cut, whatever it is that, changes your financial situation. Generally, it should be the same, but you just may have to get a credit refresh in the credit pool, at, around day 120.
Credit refresh, get some updated documentation depending on the age of those documents. But I tell people the exact same thing. It's all dependent on the underlying documentation still being valid, nothing having changed, exactly like Jason said.
Now, one part that I think is important that he's asking, and I don't know if he meant to ask it, but with the lending culture right now, with a change of interest rates over the last 90 to 120 days, if you got pre-approved more than 120 days ago, regardless of if your credit's even better, because interest rates are so much higher, your pre-approval amount could have lowered without you knowing about it, unless you're rounding back up with your loan officer to understand where your debt to income ratio is now with the new interest rates.
And how do you guys handle that? Really, the big pop was from, say, January through March, early part of April, but then we had a little dip down in June, and we're back up again. So with rates moving around like that, how do you handle a pre-approval? Everyone likes to make calls and find out what's the best rate available, but until you have a contract, it really doesn't matter. It's almost important that we give you a higher rate so that we don't have the problem that you just talked about. Randy, how do you handle that when you're pre-approving people that might take a month or 3 months or 4 months to find a home?
Yeah, I mean, it's the big thing is you're going to have that relationship starting from the beginning based on understanding and faith, basically, that they're going to do the right things. And so if someone, like I just had someone call me back that was pre-qualified in December, my first question to them was, what's changed since December, right, for you? And in that particular instance, their actually had gotten a raise and a couple other things. They'd paid off some debt, etc. Obviously, we're going to have to pull credit. And so, is your credit similar? And their previous credit was 740 or something like that. So I didn't have a lot of worries about that. And I just said, your credit similar to what it was? Have you missed any payments or anything that might submarine us? And basically what they said was, no, we're all good. I got a raise, no job changes, no nothing, just all the basic stuff. Well, you look and find a house. If you find a house, let me know, and we will, we're available 7 days a week to take a look at that and see exactly how that lands. Texas is a real big property tax state, so that's a big impact depending on where you're looking, et cetera. And so as long as, you're still in the ballpark, the interest rates didn't make a ton of difference for these people, but they were in a, 30% DTI situation at what they were wanting to look at before, and now they're maybe 38%. So it's not like it was a huge difference for that particular conversation I'm talking about. But bottom line, just find out what's changed and go from there.
Perfect. So with that, why don't we jump into tonight's conversations? Depending on what circles you run in, what you're interested in, these two names these guys are internet famous in their circles and unknown outside of that. But we're going to talk about two people: Gary Vaynerchuk, very famous on social media; Grant Cardone, both in the real estate investing and personal development space. Grant Cardone came out this week and said, basically, buying a home is a waste of money. Don't ever do it. So we kind of want to walk through the bullet points. Why would someone say that? Does he truly believe it? And really, it's clickbait to draw attention and to generate interest in his real estate investing businesses. He would like you to not buy a house and take what would normally be your down payment and invest with him to buy apartment buildings. So he has a vested interest in people being renters and not owners. But let's talk about it. His first point is one that we hear a lot of people who want to talk bad about owning a home. They say ownership has expenses that eats up your profits. You talked, Randy, about taxes, insurance, maintenance. You can have a catastrophe, a tornado, a hurricane, any part of those things. When you guys are talking to buyers, how do you address that? It is absolutely a reality. I've heard crazy numbers like you should allocate 10% of your home's value to that. 10% of your home's payment. Everyone has different rules of thumb for it. The three of us are all homeowners. I can tell you what my numbers generally look like over time, and it's way less than any rule of thumb that I've seen. How do you address this topic and just prepare them that there are actual costs of homeownership that you would be spared from if you were a renter?
Well, I think there's two parts to it. One is, are you buying a primary residence, and two, are you buying an investment property? You have two totally different conversations. If you're buying a primary residence, it's, hey, you're now going to have a much more stable life. Your children are going to have a more stable home. If you check all the stats, children that come from home ownership instead of renters tend to have better grades in school because they're in a stable environment. They're not worried about moving every 6 months, 12 months. The tremendous amount is there. The tremendous differences, the benefits are there for being your normal primary residence. Now, if you're buying investment property, unless you've got a good bit of reserves and you have the cojones to put that type of risk out there, because you could have a catastrophe, you could have a roof that is not covered by insurance, you could have a mold problem that's not covered by insurance, you could have a significant issue. So as if you're getting into the investment property realm, absolutely, it's a much more cautious approach. But primary residence, I mean, if you can afford it, you qualify. It doesn't make sense to me why you would not get a primary residence.
And in terms of that, but specifically what he's asking about is ownership. These expenses eat up the potential profits. And he goes through and gives an example. Over time, you're going to replace the roof. You're going to put in carpet. You're going to paint. You're going to need new appliances, a new kitchen. So you're looking and you think you have all of this appreciation, but it's really eating up the profits. So what he's really doing is setting up a straw man. He's comparing owning your home to buying a piece of investment real estate that are two very different things. So with that thought, Randy, do you have any response to that?
Well, I think that's the biggest thing is when you look in that environment, we're going to have to pay to live somewhere. I mean, most of us don't. At my age, I don't live with my parents anymore. Haven't in 40 years, and so I've had a track record of living somewhere, paying. If I had been paying a mortgage for someone always, whether it was paying mine or paying somebody else's. And so that's my biggest thing. Again, you got the stability of the thing, and over time rents increase. And I know that right now that's one of the big things that in our market, at least, that rentals recently have increased quite a bit. And I'm still in the same mortgage I was in 12 years ago. I've never messed with it, and still paying, etc. And so I came to this house from a rental of this house and bought it just because the guy wanted to sell it. It was a landlord, and bought it, stayed in it. And my payment now, if I were to rent the same house again, I would be about 2.5 times my payment that it was 12 years ago. And my mortgage payment's still pretty much the same as it was when I got it 12 years ago. So for me, that's a huge consideration.
Yeah, for sure. NAR put out that new rents went up 18% year over year.
Yes.
Existing rents went up 13%. I mean, it's your mortgage isn't going up 13%. You don't have 13% or 18% expenses. You've got expenses for sure, but you don't have 18% expenses year over year.
And again, in the article we're talking about, he makes the point, says no cash flow makes you dependent on the market. Well, again, it's coming from an investor's perspective. Of the last few years as an investor have been great. If you own a property, you've been able to increase your rents. You have a vacancy, you're not unhappy, you raise the rents 10, 15, 20% in some situations. So again, that concept of there's no such thing as a 30-year fixed rent. When your landlord rents you the property, he doesn't say, hey, cool, for the next 30 years, you're going to pay $1,200 a month. He says, well, for the next 12 months, this is what it is, and we'll go where the market goes from there. And much like home prices, rents over the last 30 years have gone up much higher than the rate of inflation, or at least the rate of inflation is published by the government. So those things are important to look at. He also mentioned there's limited tax benefits compared to commercial real estate. It's not really all that different. Commercial real estate, you can depreciate. Investment real estate, you can depreciate, which we don't have the opportunity to do with your primary residence. But, with the current tax code, how do you guys deal with this? For us in California, this is probably an important one. I tell most of my borrowers to not count on getting any additional tax benefit from owning versus renting. And the reason being, post 2018 tax changes, the state and local tax limits, our property taxes, if you buy at 1.25 and you buy a $700,000 house out here, you're paying $10,000. So you've hit that $10,000 cap on state and local taxes. But more importantly, if you qualified for that $700,000 house, you probably already paid more than $10,000 in state income taxes. So you're losing that benefit. So the big one was always the property taxes. We can deduct the interest, but again, for us in California, only up to $750,000. And in other parts of the country, it sounds insane that that's not enough, but a lot of our borrowers are borrowing $900,000, $1 million. So they're missing out on some of that deduction. But most importantly, it's not quite the same now that rates are somewhere in the 4.5% to 6% range, depending on the type of loan that you're talking about. But last year when rates were at 3%, if you borrow $700,000, it's $21,000 interest in the first year. And if you're married, the standard deduction is already over $24,000. So again, that's California numbers, big loan amounts, big state income taxes. Texas, you don't have a state income tax at all, so you're getting the benefit of those property taxes. So Randy, like how do you talk about tax benefits to potential home buyers?
Well, one of my big things and slicing and dicing that guy's input in that article is he's talking in the article about $200,000 down payment and whether or not that makes sense to buy a house. And that's the benefit of the VA loan is we don't have to choose between that $200,000 going towards a house or being able to invest it, et cetera, like he's talking about. So I'm a real big proponent of keeping as much cash as you can in your pocket to do different things, to attack anything that's coming at you down the road, maintenance wise, et cetera, to do investment, whatever you want with it. Because I look at it as being Texas a little bit unique in that you have to get to an 80% loan to value before you can get any equity out of a property without selling it. And so that 20% is there forever until you sell the property. It's not, it obviously continues to grow, et cetera, but you can't have access to it. So from my perspective, why would you ever put 20% down on a property when you didn't have to, because of the fact that you can't get to it without selling it? And as a primary residence, that's not why I live in a house, is to necessarily treat that as an investment. But I'm going to be able to use the VA loan with zero down payment, take that 20% that he was talking about, that $200,000 or whatever, and do whatever else I want to do with it. So from a tax perspective, don't intend to ever be a tax advisor. That's not my thing, but I'm a big proponent of keeping cash in your pocket.
Yeah, I'd add on to, if you're making an investment into something based on the tax benefits, you're totally going the wrong route. I mean, you invest for some other reason, some other growth potential, not because it's going to save you money on taxes. I mean, that's just silliness there. And I had a thought going back to the last segment. If you look at I would offer that the expenses for moving, the expenses for your security deposit, not getting your last security deposit back, getting new electric hooked up, new water hooked up, I'd bet you that all that adds up to about what it would cost in maintenance in homeownership for a year.
And a lot of that, people think, well, no, I'll just stay put. I'll stay in one place. And it's kind of a good segue to a portion of what both of these guys were talking about, saying, well, I would value the flexibility of being a renter versus any of the benefits of homeownership. So Jason, kind of what you're talking about is, yeah, you have that flexibility, but you're not as in control as you think you are, in that the landlord either can say, I want my property back, I want to sell it, I want to move into it, I want to rent it to someone else, I want to rent it for a bunch more. So people don't necessarily have the choice of making that decision of when they're going to move. But again, that argument, playing devil's advocate here, saying, well, I'm 32 years old and I would like the ability to, if I get a job offer in New York, boom, I'm out of here. If I meet a girl online in Texas, boom, I'm out of here. Any of those things give me that flexibility. And there's some truth in that trade-off, but I don't think you have quite the flexibility that you think you have as a renter in terms of the things that you can do to the house, in terms of how long you're going to stay there. Most renters, like you guys have seen it, it's I wouldn't say it's rare, but it's more common to see a first-time buyer come in and have had a couple of residences in the last few years versus someone been there for like 10 years. And all of those things that you said, the cost and expense of moving, changing all of those things, it adds up. So you guys have any thoughts on the flexibility of being a renter and how that varies or contrasts with being a homeowner?
I think it's a silly argument. I mean, even if you wanted to leave early, you're still going to have the terms of the lease to deal with.
Yeah, because most people aren't doing a month-to-month lease. You've said, hey, I'm locked in for at least this period of time with that. So let's talk about some of the things that either were ignored or glossed over in this article. So every year, the government does the Survey of Consumer Finance. The last one we have was in 2019. So we're about due for another one. So I think it'll finish here in 2022, and we'll actually get to see it next year. But the last time they published, the median net worth of a homeowner was $255,000. The median net worth of a renter was $6,300. It was a 40x multiple. So whenever I see these articles of people saying, hey, it's a fool's game to own, you've been sold a bill of goods, this doesn't make sense anymore, it's like college that made sense in the 60s and it's too expensive now. But we look at those numbers, and Randy, you, Jason, we've put a lot of buyers into homes the last 2 years, and all of them are smiling ear to ear because of the equity that they've built up. Many VA buyers for us put zero down, and they're sitting on 25-30% equity. I had an FHA buyer that bought at the end of 2020, and in the middle of 2021, we refinanced him into a conventional loan with no mortgage insurance and dropped his payment $450. Like, it's a little bit crazy when you look and you see this is consistent. Again, the government does this survey every 3 years. Sometimes it's 39 times greater net worth. Sometimes it's 45 times greater net worth, but there's no comparison. And there's some reasons for that. One of the things that I like to tell people a few years back, and I'm getting old, so it's probably longer than I thought it was, but about 10 years or so ago, the government changed the laws so that your employer can automatically enroll you into a 401k. So you sign up with a new employer, they can put you in at 3% withholdings. You can obviously stop that, but the reason why we're doing it is people, when given the choice with their new hire packet, would say, no, I need all my money. I can't spare 3, 5, 7%. But the ones that got auto enrolled stayed in it, never missed the money, and they built up money over the long haul. And that's the difference between a renter and an owner. Again, our numbers are very different. Randy, you used an example of a $100,000 purchase. I just did one of the smallest purchases I've done in a long time at $195,000 that was up in Northern California. But even that person at $195,000 is putting $200-300 a month towards principal. It's a savings account, just like that 401k that you got auto enrolled in. So this isn't magic or a sleight of hand. If we talk to, like, some of the biggest proponents of renting are engineers, and there's some unique things. If there's any of you engineers out here, I'm not saying anything bad about you. Engineers are a unique personality type. They're very good with numbers. They're disciplined. They're not into these lavish lifestyles, and there's an exception to every rule. But what I'm saying is they can pull out a spreadsheet and say, hey, if I rent a 2-bedroom apartment for the next 40 years and I save 32% of my income and I invest it diligently and I get a 7% return and the home goes up 4% a year, I come out way ahead. And that's not untrue. That spreadsheet can be true. All of the historical numbers could say. But now we go out into the real world, and every year, every 3 years, this survey of consumer finances comes out, and we see that renters come out 40 times poorer than a homeowner, despite the fact that those things are true. And it's really the fact that most of us don't have the discipline to stick to that plan on that spreadsheet. So if you're highly disciplined and you're skilled at investing and you're good with numbers and you're okay with living in an apartment, it absolutely can work out for you. But in the real world, most people are better buying a home, staying put for an extended period of time, making their payments, paying the principal down, enjoying slow and steady appreciation. And like, I don't know what you guys think about this. I always tell people real estate is not a get rich quick scheme. It's a slowly and surely get rich scheme over time. Like an example, and again, if you're in other parts of the country, this can sound absolutely crazy. In 2003, I bought my house for $580,000. And at the time, I thought I was crazy for buying that house for $580,000. And today, despite a big downturn in the middle of that, it's worth 3 times that. We've paid half of that off. And you're sitting on an amount of equity that if you wanted to sit down and figure out how much I would have had to invest and the return I would have needed to get on it to get to that point over the years, in addition to the fact that to live in a similar home, I would have had to pay a chunk of rent. When we moved in, a similar home would rent for about $2,800. And today it's like $6,000 a month if I wanted just that same home. So again, the numbers are going to be very different in South Carolina, different in Texas, but it's just the magnitude of those differences. It's going to be the same for all of you. With that, I always like, I have some really good stories of different buyers that have benefited through this over time and didn't necessarily know that they would. Anything come to mind for either of you guys of someone that maybe wasn't super pro housing that you were able to help get in and build some equity over time that they didn't, they got somewhere that they didn't imagine they were going to? Because we go through our databases, Randy, you've done this since 1989. That's a long time. There's a lot of people in there that, with some pushing and prodding have probably developed a lot of net worth that they wouldn't have otherly had.
Yeah, I've got a buddy named Kevin that we became friends after closing. That he was, I'm not going to buy. I don't know why I'm going to buy it. I'm happy, kind of thing. But his realtor, who is a close friend of his, talked him into it, and now he's sitting on $100,000 worth of equity. This guy makes $21 an hour. There's no way he would have $100,000. He would have saved $100,000 in 3 years, making $21 an hour. And he thanks me we talk about every 2 or 3 months. We have the same birthday, so we kind of have that connection. And he every 2 or 3 months say, "Hey man, I just want to let you know how much I appreciate you making me go through this because I was not going to do it. And look at the position I'm in, and I'm stable. My kids are happy." And it's one of those where it just, people that talk against it, they just don't know what they're talking about. It's like crabs in a bucket, right? You put one crab in a bucket, it'll climb out real quick. You put 2 crabs in a bucket, the second crab keeps the first one from climbing out.
I absolutely hear you, Randy. Did you have something, a story you were going to tell?
I have a lot of stories in regards to that, and one of the things that I've used to do a lot was down payment assistance programs for people, etc. And one of the big things that folks in the industry will say, "Hey, these people don't deserve a house," etc., etc. all sorts of ugly things that they can say about them. But I've got so many success stories with people that didn't have enough to do a down payment and make the deal happen. And now I'm helping them like in the fourth and fifth time on purchases. And they all started with that initial jump where they didn't have the resources to really make it happen. And now they've got, $80,000, $90,000 equity that they're pulling out of the current home sale and jumping into another one. It's just, there's so many of those stories and similar markets, 2012, 2014, whatever. And you see I just had one that we just did this last month, helped them buy with the down payment assistance program in 2012. And they just sold their house and I think they had $180,000 in equity in it from a down payment assistance start. So there you go.
I mean, what multimillionaire is going to be renting? Right? No one builds true wealth in America without having real estate in their portfolio. Now, do you need to be all in on real estate? Absolutely not. But some real estate in your portfolio is vital to building real wealth, right? And that's generational wealth, right? That's what we want to be able to take care of our children's children, right? At least, in theory, I do, but not everybody is. But the stability is just so tremendous.
Yeah.
And again, with us not being tax advisors, we don't want to go too far down this road, but you talk about the greatest gift you could leave for your children and grandchildren when you pass is real estate with large amounts of equity in it. You get a stepped up basis. It's treated preferentially in the tax code over almost anything else that you could leave them. So in terms of leaving a legacy, in terms of getting to a point, again, I think of this when I was a kid. I started doing loans when I was 22. And I can't believe anyone listened to a 22-year-old about what they should do in terms of buying and financing a home. But I never thought really about getting to 60 or 65 or 55 and saying, I'd like to retire at some point. I always had this idea, you're going to want to retire at some point, and it sure would be nice to not have a mortgage. Now, you're still going to have taxes. You're still going to have insurance. So it's not free rent, but my house is going to cost a heck of a lot less than renting an apartment once we get to the point where we have that thing paid off and want to enjoy being retired. So it's an important thought, and those are some big reasons and some big benefits for home ownership. So I think we've gone through most of the benefits and the reasons why these guys are being really short-sighted and saying save your money and your down payment money and invest. It's sort of straw men arguments that they're setting up, and then also self-serving. Both of them have big social media followings, and both of them have products to sell to people that it would be beneficial for them to have money to invest in rather than putting a down payment on a house. But with that, who is it possible? So let me ask both of you. I want both of you to answer this. Is it possible, or what type of person could walk in your door that you would say, hey, you know what? I don't think buying is right for you today. I mean, I think at some point it's going to be right for everyone. At some point in most everyone's life, it's going to be the right decision. But what types of questions would they have to answer, and in what type of way, before you guys would say, hey, I don't think buying a home is the right thing for you to do today?
It would have to be debt to income ratio driven. Their debts are just so high that it doesn't make sense. They need to spend time to figure out they need to figure out what a budget is, get on a budget, get their credit cards, get their spending, get their finances under control, get some, money saved at least for closing cost and down payment if it's FHA or whatever, would be the only thing. And I wouldn't say no, homeownership's not for you. I would say homeownership's not for you today.
Today, right now. Yeah. How about you, Randy?
Same thing. I mean, as far as resources go, et cetera, there's down payment assistance, et cetera, to help with that. But if your debt ratio is difficult and you're not going to be able to afford something that's in a decent neighborhood, currently, biggest thing is that I tell people it's not good for you today would be on credit scores. So if your credit's not where it needs to be, and granted, there's a lot of flexibility on the VA loan for lower scores, et cetera, but they want to see that your current situation is stable and that ideally it's been stable for a year. So if you have some older bad credit, you didn't pay your car, let it go back a year and a half ago, that doesn't keep you from buying a house right now. But if it just happened this month, then it's not the right time for you. You just don't have the the stability yet. The underwriter's not going to believe in you, et cetera, if it happened this month. So, but that's not to say that I haven't worked with a ton of people that let's get you to do these things in the meantime, so that when January comes around, and that's a year old, and you've shown the stability during that time period, let's save some money, let's pay some of this stuff down, let put a plan of action together right now, where that when that time comes, you're ready. And that's really the thing that I do on a regular basis.
And the credit is a big thing. Like people when their credit score is lower than where they would like it to be, tend to downplay how important it is. There's biases in the credit scoring system, but in the aggregate, when you look at it, a borrower with an 800 credit score is very, very unlikely to default on any debt, especially a mortgage. Once you go down to 680, there's going to be some defaults in there, 1 to 2%. We haven't seen them over the last 5 years because home prices have been appreciating so quickly. And when you get down into the low 600s, which still works for VA, works for FHA, you're going to see 3, 4, 5 foreclosures over the lifetime of that, or defaults. I mean, they may not go all the way to foreclosure, but a default on the payments. So it's just something that a lot of people. Go ahead, Jason.
I got an interesting thing on there. You probably know Eddie Perez that owns, EPM. I was having a conversation with him one time about that exact thing, and his portfolio, he sees less lates and less defaults on the 580 to 640 bracket that he does 640 to 680.
That's an interesting thought on it, because the data,
his thought is he thinks they care more about losing the house than the people that are in the 640, 680. Maybe they were 800 and they slid and they're on a downward trend or whatever. But he said the people that were 580 to 640 care a lot more about that property and the equity.
Anyone can be successful. I'm sure you guys see the same thing that I do. We have people who will come in, and I've got a borrower right now I got to get back to tonight. It's a 569 FICO. So that doesn't work for almost any loan program absent a huge down payment. So we're sitting there trying to coach them how to get to that level. And most people, even when told what to do, won't take those steps. We use, I'm sure you guys have used a similar credit repair company, our friend out in Arizona. I would say of the people we refer over there, maybe 1 in 5 actually follows the program. And what amazes me is the ones that will be enrolled and pay every month for 6, 7 months, and their credit scores are going down. You're like, I don't know what this is. I don't know what this mindset is. Save that money and pay the debt down if you're not going to do it. But I just say overall stability. Jason, like what you'd said, save a little bit of money. We talked about with the VA loan, you can get in with literally no money. You can have $0 in the bank and be approved for a loan and close on that. Doesn't necessarily make it a good idea. Hopefully we have some money in a 401k, a little bit of money somewhere here, because things can and do happen. So I like to see people with reserves. I like to see people with a longer time frame, meaning 5+ years. The reason being, we're coming off 2 years of monster appreciation. If we see a flat market for the next few years for a VA buyer with no money down and not funding fee exempt, paying a funding fee up front, they need 7 to 8% appreciation to be able to sell that property and break even. So that takes 3, 4, 5 years to get to that point, absent an appreciating market. So for me, it's not our decision to make, but it's kind of what we want to lay out for folks and show and make sure they're aware of that. Because the last couple of years, I've had a lot of people go, hey, I'm going to be moving to San Francisco in 2 years, but these property values are going up and the rents are so high, I just want to buy. And you start penciling it out and you go, okay, you have expenses on the way in, you have expenses on the way out. You are needing the high level of appreciation we've seen the last few years. So really stability in job, income, and credit, and knowing what they want and where they're going to be are the big things that I look at. And for anyone that qualifies and can answer those questions, home ownership over the long haul, the numbers don't lie. It's going to build more wealth for you than being a renter.
Maybe we share this thought for another one, and see if anybody makes comments that they'd want us to talk about it. But I think a discussion on where house prices are going is well beyond with this, but very important. Like I don't see us getting to where we're losing value in housing. If FHFA came out today and gave their second quarter, and every single city except for Washington, D.C. was 10% growth year over year or more. Washington, D.C. was 5.5. right? We're still 17%. We're 4%, quarter over quarter. Until we get builders building or a significant drop in population, which that's not happening, we're still going to have demand tilted way above supply in the market. Now, it's probably a good time to talk about deceleration, right? So not depreciation, but deceleration, right? So how I explain to some clients is right now, imagine you're going down the road at 20 miles an hour. And I equated that to 20% growth in housing prices. So you're going 20 miles an hour down the road when that's you're adjusting your gas pedal. And then now you take off the gas pedal a little bit, and now you're only going 15 miles an hour. You're still moving towards your goal. You're still going where you want to go. You're still making progress on getting to where you want to be. Now, let's say you take it back and you get to historically, we've been 5% growth. So let's say we're doing 5 miles an hour. Sure, that doesn't feel as fun, as good as 20% growth, but you're still moving forward. Your houses are still appreciating. Yeah, they're not going to be sustainable 25%. Like Florida was 28% year over year this quarter. California was crazy. Washington was crazy. Tennessee was crazy. But unless something significant happens, we're not going to see house values drop. Now, in the bad markets, like we talked about, there's no jobs. Sure, you're not going to see anywhere near that in Camden, South Carolina, where there's 3 red lights. But overall, I mean, housing is not in a unsafe position, and it's not going to be in an unsafe position anytime unless we get into a depression or something like that. That's the only way I can see something. I mean, unemployment's still low. I mean, labor participation is low, but unemployment's still low.
1,000%. So you hit on a couple of things that are really important. If you're a buyer and you're looking to enter at this point in the market, it is important to be cautious because we've seen such massive appreciation the last couple of years. I wanted to make a point on this. So you're talking about the FHFA index. Case-Shiller also released this morning. So they said for the first 6 months of 2022, the national index is up 10.6%. And you hear that's a lot lower than what they've been announcing for the last 2 years. But to put it in context, in the last 35 years, only 4 full years have had increases that large. So it's like this is the 4th. You're speeding down the road uncomfortably fast and you slow down, but this is still the 4th fastest you've ever driven. So it's a better market. It's much more normal. I get people freaking out that they're like, well, we're going to wait these home prices. I got to see what's going to happen. And you're like, you didn't want to buy last year because it was 20 offers on a property and you had to overbid. And now we're seeing something that's much more normal. Supply and demand are more in balance, still slightly in favor of sellers in most areas. And now people are freaked out that they don't have to get into a bidding war. They're like, wait, there's not 20 other people that want to buy this. I'm not sure I want to buy it. It's kind of a weird experience that we're having. Jason, I did a podcast with a realtor this morning, and one of the things we were talking about is how historically home prices have been sticky to the upside, meaning that once they go up, they don't like to come down. And there's logic in that because it's different than almost any other type of investment. If I own a bunch of Bitcoin and Bitcoin in June is crashing, I don't need Bitcoin. I don't need Ethereum. I don't need any type of crypto. I can sell it, take my cash, and go do something else. If my house starts going down in value, I am very unlikely to sell it just because my neighbor sold for a little bit less because I'm going to have to go rent. We talked about rents being higher. So you have that replacement. And then in the current market, something that's very unique, nearly every homeowner who bought prior to the pandemic is sitting on 40, 50, 60% equity, and they refinanced at a 2.5%, 3.5% interest rate. So to own that home is so much cheaper to rent that you could sell the house and put a bunch of money in the bank and subsidize that rent cost. But most people don't want to do that. They've built up equity. We have attachment. Randy, you had talked about earlier how just the ability to have pets, let your kid paint their room neon green if they want to do it. Any number of things that you can do. People, once they've become a homeowner, don't like to give that up. So what happens and what we are seeing, so when I started in the business, like I said, I was 22 years old, 1996. The statistics said that your homeowner is going to move every 7 years. The numbers right now are moving up close to 12 years and probably going to be longer than that unless interest rates come down lower. Because again, first-time buyers are still going to want to buy and enter the market. But the move up buyer is going to wait for a better point to change. You know what I'm saying? If I'm going to sell my $500,000 house that I owe $200,000 on at 3% interest, I'm going to pause when I go, wait, I got to double my mortgage from 200 to 400 to buy a $700,000 house, and I'm doubling my rate from 3 to 6. Just ballpark numbers. Most sellers are going to sit there. So is demand down now relative to last year when rates were half what they are? Yes. But supply is also down for all the reasons. It was already low, but all the reasons that we talked about, because a lot of people who otherwise would be willing to sell, they're not willing to make that trade up. So the supply demand balance is going to be pretty consistent. So there's some pretty strong support we have under home values. So again, none of us have a crystal ball, but we've all been in business a long time, looked at these numbers, been through a couple of cycles, including that 2008 timeframe, when you go, what's different now relative to then, and why was that the only time we've ever had a nationwide downturn in home prices? So I think we've covered the topic pretty well. I think we've gone through and answered most of the questions that we have here. Did you guys have any other thoughts or anything else you wanted to share with the viewers tonight?
Just one thing, and you touched on it briefly, but basically, I look back on my 33 years in the business, and if you take even a couple of major events like the 2002 dot-com bust, the 2008 meltdown, etc., if you take a 5-year window on and put it over those as far as appreciation goes, even with that bad year in the middle, you still had appreciation and significant appreciation. So that's a big thing for me. If your window's at least 5 years, it becomes really difficult for me to understand why you wouldn't play in primary residence housing.
And that's an important number. It's a number that I like to. I'm not saying that you ideally will live in this house for the next 5 years. Are you comfortable living in this house for at least the next 5 years?
Right.
If you have that in your favor, you should be absolutely fine.
Yeah. And to add on to what Randy's saying, Randy's great introduction there is we've never gone into a recession except for the housing bubble. We've never gone to a recession where rates weren't better on the far side and real estate wasn't better on the far side. Every single recession back 50 years, housing prices and rates have come out better on the far side of every recession except for the housing bubble. And we know that was because of the bad lending standards that we had, which have been eliminated with the Dodd-Frank bill.
Absolutely. So with that, we'll probably wrap it up for tonight. I want to just leave you with the thought of this is what the vetted VA community is here for. Jason is out moderating if you ask a question. Randy is out moderating, and I don't know what the number is, but we've got hundreds of mortgage and real estate experts in there answering your questions. So we get a lot of crazy stuff in the media, a lot of clickbait stuff. You can go to forums, moms groups, your community Facebook group, and hear lots of crazy things from people who are not talking to multiple potential buyers and homeowners on a daily basis. So it's a great resource. We're here to answer your questions. So if you have any question, there's no such thing as a bad question or a dumb question. Get out in the group, ask your questions, and we're here to answer them. So with that, Randy, Jason, I appreciate you taking the time. It's been almost an hour here tonight. Appreciate those of you watching and asking the great questions, and we'll be back next week to cover another topic. All right. Have a great night, everybody.
Giddy up.